Hello and welcome to Digital Dilemmas, a podcast where we dive deep into the intersection of gender and digitalization of work. I'm your host, Shipra. Today, we'll be talking about digital skilling for young women with a focus on non-traditional livelihood skills. And to discuss that with us, we have none other than Nisha Dhawan, Vice President of Impact and Influence at Empower, PhD in Sociology, TEDx speaker, board member of Force Feminista, and many more things. Welcome, Nisha, to our podcast.
Thank you so much, Shipra. It's so lovely to be here and to be talking about such an important issue with you.
So, my first question to you would be about your work. Like, what do you do at Empower, particularly with girls and women? Like, if you can just share it with us.
Absolutely. So why don't I tell you about Empower's journey, which has spanned over 25 years. So Empower is actually a public foundation that was created by a group of people working in emerging markets finance. And what they realized is they were traveling around the world and they would fly first class, stay in fancy hotels, visit beautiful offices, and yet there was this entire world happening outside of their windows. And they said, if we're investing in economies, we need to be investing holistically. And that's really where Empower was born. It was actually a group of people who wanted to give back to the countries where they were working. And interestingly, several of these people working in finance were from Brazil and Argentina and India and Vietnam and Philippines, which are the countries which are, 5 of the 15 countries that Empower works in today. Way back in 2005, Empower started working with young people, ages 10 to 14, and has had an articulated focus on girls in particular, recognizing that adolescent girls are often the most underserved and most marginalized, and they experience various levels of intersectionality. So what we mean by that is it's not just their gender alone, it's their age, it's their class, it's their caste, it's whether they're from specific minorities. Very often, girls are burdened with additional household responsibilities and care. And that then influences their ability to thrive, to learn skills, to complete school, to safeguard their sexual and reproductive health, to really think about their mental health, and eventually join the labor force. So Empower really began that journey in about 2005. And even today, gender is a non-negotiable cost cutting across all of the work that we do at the organization, across all 15 countries where we work. And we've taken a very interesting trajectory. So our president and CEO, Cynthia Steele, who at that point was our global head of programs, she was actually traveling in Ghana. And right after that, she went on a trip to Latin America. And regardless of moving continents, she kept seeing the exact same things. Women in beauty parlors, women in stitching, women in beading, women in food production. And that's something we see a lot in India. It's a term that I learned that I love using, which is parlor, petticoat, and papad. While there's reasons for these industries to exist and for women to have a role, whether as micro-entrepreneurs or as salaried staff members, these skills are not actually changing gender norms for women and girls because they're replicating processes or they're naturalizing what women are, quote unquote, naturally meant to be good at. I think the other thing about all of these skills is the fact that they don't remunerate as well because the market in and of itself does not remunerate this sort of work because it is a natural extension of a woman's personality or what women should be doing. And the third thing is there's a lot of varying rates of success. We've seen amazing success stories in India, and I think in many ways India has championed so many of these spaces. But at the same time, the rates of failure are also very high, especially when you're doing it through a micro-entrepreneurship model, because women aren't necessarily leaving the house for their jobs. And Naila Kabir, says something great about this, is that the three most critical things for agency to come through livelihoods is that the work must be salaried, it must be out of the house, and it must be stable. So that's really where we at Empower started thinking about, okay, so number one, there has to be something out there. There have to be great models that community-based organizations are already using. And number two is, how can we actually leverage that to be able to view our work in livelihoods programming as disruptive in and of itself? So it was at that time, this was about 2010, 2011, that we commissioned research on, at that time, we used to call it non-traditional income generation, and really tried to, tease out the organizations, the civil society organizations who were doing good work, who could potentially lead the way on non-traditional livelihoods. So that's really where things kicked off. And what we saw was incredible. We saw organizations in Peru who were teaching taxi driving. We saw organizations in northern Ghana that were teaching livestock production and rearing. And here in India, we had organizations teaching girls how to be electricians and plumbers and driving private and commercial vehicles. And at that point, we realized that the world is absolutely open to various trades and skilling. So that's really where we are today. And I think if you think about our lessons learned, I think there's sort of a 3 or 4, I would say, lessons that really rise to the top. The first one is that women's agency is absolutely needs to be at the center of the conversation. It's not about the technical skill alone. It has to be complemented by soft skills or essential skills. And that is everything from self-efficacy to social capital to first aid to financial education. The second thing that we realized is that traditional skills won't actually change the nature of the market. And what we mean by that is there's a lot more disruptive power in non-traditional livelihoods than traditional livelihoods as it relates to gender equity. The third thing that I mentioned is that entrepreneurship has very mixed rates of success. So a lot of what we did was about getting women out of the house and into salaried positions. And I would say the last thing that we've learned, and I think this is so critical to the work that we do at Empower, is you have to begin early. If you ask a 10-year-old girl what they want to be when they grow up, they will say, we want to be a doctor, or we want to be an astronaut, or we want to, be a mountain climber. And then by like 13, 14, they start saying, we want to be a teacher. We want to work in the government. We want to work in civil service. And unfortunately, by the time they're 17 or 18, the girls are saying, we just want to stay alive. And I think for us at Empower, it's really been about how do you expose girls at a very young age, so sort of the 10 to 14 age group, when the world is still open to them, when avenues are still open to them, when they haven't yet inherited many of the fossilized ways of thinking about gender and livelihoods, and intervene in partnership with girls in that moment so that they have the agency to change their life trajectory. So I think that's been our fourth and most valuable lesson, which is why so much of what we do is focusing on that exposure even before we start talking about employability and employment. So the way we actually break that up at Empower is when we talk about exposure, we mean exposure to different trades, and that's like 10 to 14-year-olds. It's here are all of the things that you can be. Here are all of the ways in which you can engage. Here are all of the ways in which you can learn a livelihood. And then that sort of 15 to 19 age group is when we're really thinking about employability skills. And it's only after that, sort of 18, 19 years old, do we start working on girls and young women with technical skills and employment skills. Because if we didn't take those 7 or 8 years beforehand, then they would have never aspired to be a driver or a plumber or an electrician or a mason. And those are things that we're able to see too.
Yeah, so as you've worked on NTL, non-traditional livelihood, for a very long time, can you also explain it to us? What does it mean? What all promotes an NTL skilling? If you could just explain it to us a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have 2 or 3 definitions that I can lean on. And I think that one builds upon the other, which is quite exciting. So very often people say that is Empower's focus on non-traditional livelihoods because you completed your PhD in non-traditional livelihoods. And did you drive the focus on NTL? And I'm very proud to say that it was the other way around. So when I joined Empower in 2012, I was like, wow, look at the framing of livelihoods programming, is that the actual programming and the actual livelihood could be disruptive in and of itself. And that actually launched me into a journey of doing my PhD and completing it specifically on non-traditional livelihoods. So the point of departure in many ways is Empower's working definitions, which are threefold. So non-traditional livelihood, very simply, can be women entering trades and jobs that have been restricted to them because of their gender. The second is women entering jobs that have not been gendered. So we see this with the green industry. We see this every time there's a new space in the market. There's this beautiful opportunity for women to own and engage in that space. And then the third is we recognize the intersectionalities, that sometimes it's not about gender alone, but it's about so many other things. And therefore, the third part of Empower's definition is what are the restrictions placed on women and girls, A, because of their gender, so part one, but B, because of their class, their caste, their race, their socioeconomic status, where they come from, their sexual orientation, their gender. It could be a variety of other things that contribute to women engaging disruptively. And that kind of leads me to the second definition, because the non-traditional livelihoods, which is a network of practitioners working in this space across India, their definition offers a little bit more color and a little bit more contextualization. And what they do is they actually say that non-traditional livelihoods are dynamic. So what might have been non-traditional 20 years ago is completely traditional today. So for example, female police officers in India, we don't see that as non-traditional because we're just so, there is a space, there is laws around it, there's space around it. And for that reason, 20 years ago, it might have been groundbreaking, but it isn't today. Similarly, women in the army. And I think the other thing that the non-traditional livelihoods network definition adds that is critical is that non-traditional livelihoods is contextual. So what we mean by that is what might be non-traditional in one jurisdiction might be totally traditional in another. So I always use the example of if you go to a 5-star hotel in North America, most of the housekeeping and cleaning staff there are female. Whereas if you go to a 5-star hotel in India, most of the housekeeping and cleaning staff are male. And there's reasons for that because of job satisfaction. There's upward mobility. If you're working at a hotel, it opens up your pathway to more senior and senior housekeeping position, right? So what is absolutely earth-shattering or groundbreaking in one context might be business as usual in another. And then I come last because I actually did come last, and I stand on the shoulders of giants, both the Non-Traditional Livelihoods Network as well as Empower. But how I sort of created the contours around my PhD research is I talked about it as young women consciously entering occupations that have been denied to them because of their gender, so that they can specifically access increased job security, greater income and benefits, and that too within the formal workplace. So I kind of went narrower with my definition. And I think what all of these three definitions tell us is that the engagement with non-traditional livelihoods has the ability to enable a disruption in relation to social norms, because the mechanism that they've utilized is disruptive in and of itself. So what we mean by that is the act of being a female carpenter is, one is you're earning a livelihood, and that's amazing. And we know all of the reasons why it's important for women to be engaged in the labor force. But the mechanism which we earning a livelihood is also changing the landscape. So Audre Lorde, who's one of my favorite theorists, feminists, I'm going to give you one of her quotes, which is, "For we have built into all of us old blueprints of expectation and response, old structures of oppression, and these must be altered at the same time as we alter the living conditions which are a result of those structures. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So the tool that we use to break into rigid ideas of what women can do in terms of livelihoods, the tool or the skill has to be outside of old structures of oppression, has to be outside of the old blueprints that we've all inherited. And that's why non-traditional livelihoods are so critical.
Thank you. I mean, it's so multi-layered. Digital skillings is an important component of NTL. So what does effective programming look like on grounds? So what are the building blocks of NTL program? What a solid NTL program look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the short answer to that is we're still learning, but I can tell you what we've learned so far. And one is, let's just call a spade, digital skills in today's day and age are absolutely critical for girls and young women. And yet, you know, the world over, the internet penetration for women and girls is not the same as for boys and young men. Access to smartphones is not the same. And therefore, we need to view digital skilling not only for the skill itself, but also we need to view it as a tool for gender transformation. So there's a couple of key components. So the first is we actually use a tool that we developed. It was actually a sports for development tool called the Girl Path. You know, this was in the late 2009, early 2010, and before my time at Empower. And our vice president of programs, who's currently our CEO, was visiting Brazil, and along with our program officer for Latin America. And they got to a field, and it was a sports for development program where they played football and talked about SRHR. And they get there, and there's no girls on the field. And the curricula is there, people are interested, but it is literally this Herculean, impossible task to get girls to come onto the field and play football. And they said, oh my God, what is this? So they did their digging, and they very quickly realized that we very often see the barriers that are the tip of the iceberg. We don't see the barriers that sit underneath the iceberg. And from that, a tool that we actually created called the Girl Path was born. And what the Girl Path does is it accesses the barriers at every step of a girl's journey in order for her to not be able to access programming. So the first level is what's going on in her own head. So if we think about digital skilling, it's things like, I've been told my whole life that digital skills are for boys, and that smartphones are for boys, and that the internet is for boys. And I haven't been exposed to or allowed, and maybe the universe and the world and my ecosystem is right that this is something that should just be outside of the girl. So that's the first level, is this deep internalization of the disconnection between girls and digital skills. The second step of that, of the girl path, is the household. So what are the barriers at the household level that actually inhibit women and girls from accessing digital skills? It's very varied in that case. It could be very simply कि हमारे घर में बिजली नहीं आती, right? Like we just don't have electricity to charge our devices. It might be that we don't have the money for devices. We don't have the money to be able to pay for dongles, right? So it's, one is the infrastructure, two is the finances around it, but three is even when the phone enters a house, what digital skills have this remarkable ability to do is they have the ability to make the public-private split, the private realm for women and the public realm of men. They have the ability to make that barrier, penetrable. And what I mean by that is a phone instantly makes the private public and the public private. So imagine if you are a woman who is experiencing violence in her home, you now have the ability to pick up the phone and contact a helpline number. If you are moderately literate, you have the ability to search for your recourse and your resources of what you can and cannot do. You have the ability to talk to somebody and speak to them about the law. So all of a sudden, the fact that women were so viciously relegated to the private realm becomes permeable. And what that means is at the household level, because of that fear, because of that anxiety around technology, digital skills and access become tightly guarded by power brokers. The third step of the girl path is, the third barrier is the community itself, right? Is why are you leaving the house? Why are you walking through the streets? What is this center teaching? And the same sort of thinking that the household has, the community has, right? Is why are you sending your daughter to learn about the internet? The internet is evil. It can teach her all these horrible things, right? So the third barrier is the exact same thing at the barrier of the community. And then the final one is when you get to the training center, imagine if there's no infrastructure, so there aren't any toilets. If again, there is, infrastructural issues like bijli, like lack of electricity, that becomes an issue. But importantly, what if the trainers in that center, they've also drunk from the same well with the same sleeping pill, and they also might believe that, wait a minute, I don't know why there are girls in my class, because they should not be learning these skills. So I think what's really critical here is recognizing and accounting for and programming across the entire life cycle of this journey. So in a girl's head, in her household, in the community, and then at the training center. Because the second a girl walks through the doors of a training center, she's already undergone and overcome so many barriers that are preventing her from getting to that place. So that's the first thing I would say about what constitutes a strong digital training program. The second thing is really beginning early, before these ideas are set in your minds, saying that the internet is yours and the typing is yours and graphic design is yours and content creation is yours and it's yours to have and to own. And then, therefore, the story becomes about safely using the internet and really safeguarding for digital safety. I think the third thing that constitutes a solid program is the soft skills, right? So it's not about the technical skills itself. I was joking actually recently that a good skilling program and a good livelihoods program, only 30% of the actual program should be about the skill, and 70% should be all of the soft skills that sit around it and reinforce the technical skills. So what I mean by that is, if you are learning accounting, for example, on Tally, 30% of it should be about Tally. And 70% of it should be about your financial education, your agency, your self-efficacy, your social capital. And I think the last thing, what we hear from girls and what we hear from our programmers is the success is determined by the size of the market. Is if the market is not ready to absorb skilled young women as employees, we're in this reinforcing prophecy of we gave girls these skills and now look at that, they don't have a job, and that's because this job is for men, right? If a girl is taught how to drive and she spends 9 months, 10 months, 1 year getting her driving license and she's road ready, but she's sitting on the bench because there's no employer that wants to give her a job, can you imagine what her community will say? They'll say things like, "Inko ye kaam karna nahi chahiye, aur dekho isne kiya aur usko naukri nahi mil rahi." That is the number one deal breaker for a lot of the non-traditional livelihoods programs, a lot of the skilling programs. That if the market is not ready to absorb girls with agency who have these skills, we're never going to get anywhere.
Then I think it becomes a very difficult task, right? Because market is also ever changing.
Exactly. I think for this reason, our work at Empower and the work of the amazing 165 local partners that we work with across the world is about creating supportive infrastructure for the girls, recognizing that skilling alone won't be transformative. It's about ensuring that the market is ready, and it's about ensuring that we've solved for barriers around care work, barriers around intersectionality, and then also infrastructural barriers like electrification and internet access. What I think is really interesting is that in 2011, we did some research, and we were actually asked by a bilateral age agency. They're like, you've been working with adolescent girls. Can you please tell us what you think the effect of COVID-19 has been on the lives of adolescent girls in India, in urban areas? And we said, hold on, we can't answer that question, but adolescent girls in urban areas can. And what we did was we actually trained 25 girl researchers in participatory action research, and they went out and spoke to 153 of their peers. And they came up with a wide array of recommendations on education, on livelihoods programming, on violence, on the pandemic itself. And in addition to that, they actually said, as we think about post-COVID reconstruction, here are some of the things that we need to think about. And it's so interesting that what I just said is exactly what the advice that the girls gave us. That the number one thing is advance our digital access to jobs, to education, to the skills that we need to be future ready. The other thing that they said is the silver lining of COVID-19 has been to invest in blended learning options. And that is something that should continue beyond the pandemic. And the third thing, which I thought was fascinating and super interesting, is for girls from marginalized environments, they're like the actual infrastructure, so the electrification and things that we've been talking about, that's the biggest issue. And the number one thing that civil society organizations can do, that the government can even do, is provide spaces where girls can access the internet safely, where they can come and charge their phones, where they can come and ask questions if they're confused, where they're taught about how to safeguard their digital presence in a safe, or I would say brave space where they can continue engaging. So this is very much from the advice of the girls. I think I sound really, really smart, but all of us at Empower are deeply listening to girls and young women and then acting on their advice to us.
So you talked about the safe spaces that girls advised about. Do we have examples from India of similar spaces?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what we always say is our strength is actually in our local partners, because very often they're from the community themselves. The founders are very much from the communities themselves, and they have that nuance to be able to ensure that our chances of success are greatest over time. Like, for example, our grantee partner, Feminist Approach to Technology here in Delhi, one of the things that they're really doing is really focusing on early exposure to digital skills, to really speak to girls when they're 6, 7, 8, 9. So they don't have this fear of technology built into their sense of self. But then they're taking it a step further, right? They're really focusing on how to use those digital skills for presentations, for community mobilization, but also as an advocacy tool for their own safety in the community. And then, like, you look at an organization like IdeoSync, which is also urban, it's in Faridabad, and they've really used a rights-based approach to their digital media literacy. So one part about it is like knowing the basics about computers and, using the MS Office suite, for example. But girls are actually learning how to record podcasts like this one. They are learning how to make reels. And how are they then using these skills? Like, how are they using the creative production skills as a tool for empowerment in their community? You look at sort of rural environments, and Sigodicon, one of our grantee partners in Udaipur, their programming is really looking at the fact that there isn't access to the actual hardware, to computers, to smartphones. And what they're providing is access through a computer library, through safe and exclusive access to smartphones, so that girls can A, have the exposure, but B, use it for a tool. So, like, just to give you an example, today it is next to impossible already in India to apply for a government scheme or to apply for higher education without a laptop, right? Without an internet connection, right? But if you're a girl from a rural area and A, you don't know how to use it, and B, you don't have the infrastructure around you to be able to even access it, then that's a hurdle too far. It's not just about learning or knowing how to fill out a form. It's about having internet that's high speed enough to enable that form to load. So what this organization is doing is creating those safe spaces in the community. And then another example in Rajasthan is Mantra, which works outside of Chittorgarh in extremely rural areas where there isn't full electrification yet. And they are actually bringing computers, so they're bringing that digital access and the skilling that goes with it to rural areas to enable a tighter connectivity between girls and digital skills. Girls don't need us to tell them what to do. Girls already know what they want to do. Our local partners do not need a funder to tell them what to do. They know what they're doing, right? So then what is our role? And I always think in analogies. So the analogy that I very often give is it's like we're the scaffolding around a building, right? So if you think of a construction site, first, the scaffolding goes up. Right? The kanate, I know that's a Punjabi word, but anyways, the bamboo goes up first, and then the building is built. But when that building is ready, the scaffolding comes down. And that is exactly what our role is as academic practitioners, as anyone in advocacy, anybody in civil society. It's about being that scaffolding so that girls can dream as fully as they can, so they are skilled as fully as they can, and beyond that, they'll be okay. They have more resilience, more grit, more strength, more determination, more intellect than any of us will ever have.
Earlier, because that's my confusion, you talked about soft skills. And generally when we talk about soft skills, we think about, communication skills and all. But I think what you had in mind is something different. Could you expand a little more on what soft skills mean in NTL's context?
Yeah, 100%. And I think soft skills is absolutely everything that you need to thrive. I personally don't like the word soft skills. I like the word essential skills. Our grantee partner Azad Foundation uses skills plus plus to describe this. On one hand, it could be anything from building your sense of agency. So that is, do you have the ability or the tools in your toolbox to be able to set goals, to be able to reach out to somebody if you need help? Do you have 5 friends that you can rely on? Do you have non-family members that you can talk to? Do you have people that you can confide in or ask for advice? Soft skills can also look like, and when we talk about livelihoods, it can also mean grooming. It can also mean this is what a 9-to-5 job looks like. If you're not going to come in, you have to call in sick. This is what, being punctual means. This is how you to interface with your manager if you have a question. These are so that's what soft skills really mean in the context of livelihoods, right? But the one way to describe this, again, using analogies, is it's not about the specific skills, right? Imagine every girl has a toolbox, and in that toolbox you have it's in many ways the project here is to make sure she has the right tools in her toolbox. Does she have a hammer, a screwdriver, a wrench? Now, don't ask me to name any other tools because I really don't know. But today she might use the hammer to build a chair. Tomorrow she might use the hammer to build a bed. And the day after she might use the hammer to put up a painting, right? But once she knows how to use a hammer, she can use it in multiple ways. So imagine that hammer represents negotiation skills. She might negotiate to be able to go to school. She might be able to negotiate to eat food at the same time as her younger brother. And the day after that, she might be able to negotiate a marriage that she is happy with. And the day after that, she might be able to negotiate violence in her own home. The hammer is the hammer, right? But you can use the hammer for multiple forms. Same thing is in negotiation skills. Today might be used for one thing and tomorrow might be used for something different. And I think what's very important, and this is sort of a good analogy for gender transformative training, is once that hammer is in your toolbox, it's never going away, right? The NGO can disappear, but if that girl has that hammer in her toolbox, she will be able to use it for a very, very long time to come. So it enables girls to not be reliant on civil society actors, but rather, for her to build her skill in partnership with civil society actors and then be forever transformed. There's a bunch of words that are used to describe this. So soft skills, essential skills, transferable skills, life skills. But really it is about building the agency of girls so that they have the ability to navigate through their own lives.
So, which NTL sectors within the digital economy has the potential for girls and women to participate? And here, if you can talk about not just economic resources, but also like non-economic resources, which will enable this.
The very simple answer to your question is that every job in the digital economy has women and girls to participate. But unfortunately, that is not our reality. So I want to actually start with a story here. The first computer program was actually written by Ada Lovelace, who was a woman. The women in Hidden Figures were human computers, right? That's what they used to call them. And they were mathematicians, but it was such a marginalized job that it was done in some back office of NASA, like away from where the action was. And then all of a sudden, the quote unquote human computers or the mathematicians were needed for data entry into the big supercomputers that we started seeing in the 70s. Until then, it was still a woman's job, and in fact, it was marginalized women who used to be the data analysts or the data entry programmers into these supercomputers. And then all of a sudden, somebody goes, hold on, computers can do far more than just mathematical calculations. Like the whole world can be opened up because of computers. And then all of a sudden, in the 80s and 90s, when I thought of a computer engineer as a child, it was always a guy. It wasn't a woman. And this is what happens to jobs. When jobs become more lucrative, when they become more influential, when they are closer to power, you see women falling away and men inhabiting that. And that's exactly what's happened with specifically around computers. And then there's this other very odd story that is happening, is this irrevocable link between men and machines and women and nature, right? So men are closely associated with technology, with civilization, with culture, and women embody the physical. They embody nature. They're, they carry on generations. They birth children. And that discourse, that naturalization, or that the bifurcation between women and men, nature and culture, is something that we continue to reinforce and reinforce and reinforce. There's a theorist called Faulkner who talks about how technology is where the power is. Technology is both materially and symbolically a huge, often critical element of hegemonic masculinity. So both modern technology and hegemonic masculinity are so deeply linked to industrial capitalism. And for that reason, technology and masculinity are linked by themes of control and of domination. She actually asks us to think about who the primary actors in the design of technology are, and they're men. And it is a very important element of male identity formation. Even AI has learned already to be gendered. And it's because what's inbuilt into even technology is these so taken for granted notions of masculinity and femininity, or male and female, men being visible, of men being productive, and men being leaders and women not so much. And history tells this again and again and again, right? Like if you think about mechanization, so this is Jabvala and Sinha, right? And they actually talked about the cotton ginny in India, right? Is that when things are manual in factories, the work that is being done is actually being done by women. And the second there's mechanization, that 10 women on a factory line is replaced by one man who's like the line controller. It's actually really interesting is that when technology enters a factory, women are most impacted because they'll have the most job losses, and then women are replaced by fewer men, and the men that they're replaced by, their income might actually increase over time.
Yeah, because now they are the experts who know how to run the machines.
Yeah. And it's not only technology, right? It's also, if you look at advancements in agriculture, women have largely been responsible for weeding and sowing work, right? Here in India, but in many parts of the world. So the second that technological advancements relating to weeding and sowing were introduced, it wasn't that women, you've been weeding and sowing for millennia, here's the technology to make your life easier. What happened was, okay, well now there's a machine introduced, so A, thanks very much, we don't need you anymore. And B, this big and scary thing is way too hard, so let the men handle it, right?
Yeah.
That's what we
You
see
won't
happening.
be able to handle it. Yeah.
Exactly.
True. So, Nisha, what do you think we need to do to sort of mitigate socioeconomic and systematic factors that influence how women engage with and benefit from digital spaces?
That's a great question. And my very, very simple answer to that would be listen to what the girls have to say. Listen to what they're telling us, because there's no greater expert in the lives of girls than girls themselves. They are going to be able to speak truth to power in terms of the barriers that they're facing, the systemic factors that they're facing, and how those things or those issues become barriers in their engagement with digital spaces. And once we know what those barriers are, then we can actually solve for them. What I've heard and what I have seen is two or three things, and this is again girls' expertise and not my own. The first is the need for role models, right? If there are people around them who have sort of switched their orbit and continued in tertiary education or found lucrative jobs or are the primary earner in their family, it makes the case for the hundreds and thousands of girls who come after them, it makes it easier. And I think sometimes we underestimate the value of role models, especially in non-traditional spaces, right? Because the element of fear becomes less. So I think it's just really strongly, for civil society programmers, for funders to really invest in building a group of role models that are, and it's not saying, here's Shakuntala Devi and she's an amazing mathematician. Shakuntala Devi is unattainable to so many of the people that we work with. But here's Durga or Saima from your community, and they now work in creative production, designing reels for a shop in the mall. That is accessible. That is there and it's right in front of them. So I think that would be the first thing. The second thing is, I think, and this is, I don't know if it's unique to digital skilling in particular, but it is definitely the way that the structure and the nature of the job market is changing, is the speed of change around digital skills. What we need today is not what we're going to need a year from now. So I think the larger question for the civil society sector is, how do you engage with market actors and how do you have your finger on the pulse to keep up with the speed of change of technology? And then I think just recognizing that the journey to the cutting edge advancement of technology is much shorter in Delhi than it would be in, Eastern Maharashtra, in rural Eastern Maharashtra. As civil society programmers, as funders, as academic, what are the skills and tools that we can use to actually shorten or compress that journey? And then I think the last thing is, women will engage with and benefit from digital spaces, and they will benefit from technology if there are successes at the end of them. And however you slice it, that success looks like a job, right? So I think the most critical thing is really to speak about how market readiness, absorption, getting the infrastructure in place so that once girls are skilled, they have the ability to find a home for themselves in a job that they can retain in the long run.
So Nisha, you also talked about, when earlier you were talking about Naila Kabir's framework, and you said how even getting women out of the house is one of the parameters for non-traditional livelihood skills. But what if someone has, is a data analyst or is a coder and she's working from home, so, or is part of some green jobs and some new digital jobs? So will that, if she's working from home, will that be seen as part of non-traditional livelihood skills?
Well, I think, Shipra, it depends, right? It really, really does depend, because it's, what Kabir argues is that here is a factor for success, right? And okay, imagine if I'm a coder and I have space and time within my home. I am not disturbed during the workday. I am getting a fair wage for my coding skills. My money is going into a bank account. I can then use that money to leave my house and, go out for a cup of chai and a samosa with my girlfriends, and I have agency over my life because I'm earning and I have enough disposable income to, right? Versus, and this is something that COVID also showed us, right, is how detrimental flexible work has been for, or hybrid work has been for women, right? Because if a woman's at home, it's like, well, she's at home, so she can also serve the lunch, and she can also, take care of the household chores, or she can also take care of her child while she is working, right? Because that naturalization of women being in the house is reinforcing itself. Coding or not, green job or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think you talk to female executives in Fortune 500 companies, they will also say the expectations in terms of household dynamics changed for them during COVID and when they started working at home, right? So it's not about the temporal space that is occupied, but rather, does that woman who is working in her house have the ability to negotiate with systemic patriarchy that exists within her house, expectations upon her as a woman, and is she able to do all of the things that she could have done if she was not working from home? I think the other really sort of important aspect of this story is being at home actually detrimental in terms of her remuneration or in terms of her career progression, right? I think that in and of itself is another story for a whole other podcast. Is over time, what does hybrid work mean for upward mobility in the workplace? What does it mean for entrepreneurs who are working out of the house? We know that, outside of the digital economy, there was a study that was done in the 80s in Andhra by Maria Mies, which looked at lace making. So it was looking at piecemeal work where you get 2 rupees per bead, or 5 rupees for this, right? And then a middleman, and I'm using the word man, I'm consciously not being gender neutral here. A middleman would come to the house and say, I will buy your embroidered fabric for whatever, 50 rupees a meter. And then that same person will go to a larger market and sell it for 100 rupees a meter. And that larger market would sell it to a bigger store for 200 rupees a meter. So that distance from the market was very extractive of women, right? So the world has changed, because if I'm sitting online and I'm a coder, let's use your example, I have penetrated several layers already of the distance between my house and the market, because I'm probably supplying my coding skill B2C, right? So to the end client, as opposed to, I'm not selling my coding skills to 3 people who will then go to the market and sell my skills. So that dynamic has changed. But at the same time, the systemic or structural gender norms of the household have not. So I think it's a very, very difficult question to ask. I would say the circumstances of the barriers are different.
Yeah, and the way you answered the question, it actually made, I just got reminded of all my friends who work from home and they have to take care of many things.
So, I mean, let's bring it home. I'm having this conversation from my home office, and before I got onto this call, I had to tell 10 people that I am recording this podcast. So it's not like one of my Zoom calls where you can walk in and ask me a question or send me a voice note, because I won't be able to answer you. It's tough for those of us who have privilege in our backpack. Imagine what it's like for those who don't.
And if you're working, especially if you're working with 6 people in the room, it becomes a different story altogether.
Exactly. 6 people and no agency to be able to say my work is important and this matters, and you have to respect my income generation potential. You have to respect my contributions to this family, like my financial contributions to this family, right? So what are the power dynamics that we're contending with to even negotiate, 45 minutes of uninterrupted work?
Thank you, Nisha. And I think now I have the last question for you. So, looking ahead, what is your vision for the future of digital skilling and NTL for young girls?
My vision is that in the future, we would not have to have a podcast about this topic. My vision is that my PhD becomes this look at how things were in the olden days, because none of this is an issue anymore. My vision is that women and girls don't even have to question their place and their space in the jobs of today and in the future, that their salaries come home to them and they have the ability to save and spend and share how they want. I guess my vision is also that, if you think about this whole interview so far, I myself have used the word female driver, female carpenter, female plumber, right? Because the language and the vocabulary is political and it is necessary today. But my hope is in the future we just say driver or plumber or electrician or rocket scientist or brain surgeon and we don't, or astronaut, and we don't have to engender what that means.
Thank you, Nisha. I mean, it was an insightful conversation. So from bridging the gender digital divide to fostering confidence, leadership, and economic independence, it is clear that these skills are more than just tools. They are pathway to agency and empowerment. And to our listeners, I hope that this conversation has inspired you to think critically about how we can make digital spaces and opportunity truly gender inclusive. Nisha, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you for your time and incredible work that you do.
Thank you so much, Shipra. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe. Until we meet next time, next episode. See you. Bye.